Thank you, Aaron. And it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Marianne Davidson, who has been with us all week. Marianne is the Chief Security Officer at Oracle Corporation. She's responsible for Oracle software security assurance and other things, I'm sure. She represents Oracle on the board of directors of the IT Sector Information Sharing and Analysis Center and is on the international board of the Information Systems Security Association. Marianne has been named one of the information security's top 5 women of vision, is a Federal 100 award recipient from Federal Computer Week, and was recently named to the IAS-NSA Hall of Fame. She's testified on cybersecurity before both houses of Congress and also served as a commissioned officer in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps. Marianne, it's a delight to have you with us this week.
Okay, do I have a clicker here? Very important, I'm a blonde. I need all the help I can get. It is truly a pleasure to be here, and I want to certainly thank my gracious hosts for inviting me. I hope they'll still feel glad they invited me after the next half hour. But I also want to thank you in the audience. When you work in private industry, even though I was a military officer, you sort of take for granted that you live in a nice, safe, secure world. And we shouldn't take that for granted. It's because of the activities of people at NSA and in the services and in many other branches of government working on these crucial defense problems that I don't have to worry when I go to work, and I feel very confident and safe. So I want to thank you for that. This is sort of an odd title for a presentation. I'm sure you're wondering, what was she smoking when she wrote this? I actually am a surfer, and one of the things I thought about in terms of innovation is surfing is like innovation, because when you have to commit to a wave and catch it, and it's one of the most exhilarating things that you can do when you make the wave. And it's also very competitive. People don't think of this as a competitive sport, but on any given wave, there are a good wave, it can go right, you can go left. There are 2 people, and there might be 50 people competing for that. So you have to be nimble, you have to be smooth, you have to be aggressive to beat that other person in there and get that experience of making that terrific wave. And what you don't want is things that are going to hinder you. You might have a leash to hold you to your board, but if that leash catches on something or catches on a wad of kelp or somehow gets obstructed, you miss the wave and somebody else gets it. So what I'm going to talk about is, how do you harness that innovation? How do you make that wave without putting things in the way that are going to be actually problematic for us and hinder you? Oops, did I just shut it down? Aha, you're not cleared to see this. The big green button was forward. I'm a blonde, I told you there was a problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about background, and then how does industry do what they do to innovate, and what can government do in particular to be helpful, at least avoid hurting innovation and actually foster innovation, because we all benefit from this. And last, how do we think a little bit differently about this problem? So my intent here is not to be didactic. I'm sure a lot of this you know, but it's worth kind of remembering, because if I'm at work and I talk about GPS, everybody at Oracle knows I'm talking about global product security, which is my team. GPS for you all probably means something else, like a GPS system. So sort of talking about the language and the landscape helps us understand one another. So one of the good news really for everybody is that we have really highly functional, feature-rich software and hardware because of a global marketplace. And that's worth remembering, because when you work, I'm focused on US security, you sometimes forget that the people who are supplying you have to work in a global marketplace. And that's actually the mechanism by which you get highly feature-rich, highly maintainable products and increasingly cloud services. And it's global access to talent if you're a corporation. One of the great things is, if a customer who's an on-premises customer says, oh, I got this real problem, my system, it's critical, that ticket, that help desk ticket, goes around the globe, because we have data centers all around the world that can help solve these problems. So that's great. It really is 7 by 24, and it's not because one poor engineer is staying up 3 days in a row trying to solve a problem. That's actually a benefit to everybody. And one of the other benefits is that we get global customer input for how we drive our product direction, including security. There's an expression, there's nothing new under the sun, and most people have very similar security problems or concerns even if they might be in different parts of the world or different market sectors. So this is actually a benefit to everybody. And that's what makes it possible. You know, in the old days, you were building custom things, and if you're trying to maintain them, it's like trying to find somebody who knows cuneiform. Worse, who knows the difference between Akkadian, Babylonian cuneiform. And now you don't have to worry about that because there are standards, and there's, you know, more feature richness and a global marketplace. The other thing that I should mention, which again I know, and I think you probably do too, is we have really good commercial off-the-shelf software and hardware now. And it's very good general purpose, and I will say, having been in this field for probably at least security for about 20 years now, it's really better in terms of assurance and better in terms of security. But that doesn't make it all purpose. I think you know that, but the example I could come up with is, you know, I got a big brother, and I still like to zap him. So I can get a pretty darn good squirt gun. And I might even get a super soaker. He's kind of a big guy, and you know, I need every advantage I can get. So, but even if you have a really good squirt gun, you cannot take that and take it to a system integrator and say, put your magic pixie dust on it. I'm going to hand it to the Marines and tell them it's an M4. Marines are not stupid. They're not going to buy that. So even though a squirt gun's pretty good for zapping your brother, there's nothing you can do to it that's going to make it an M4. And people think hardware and software is different. It's not different. It's really good. It's better. It's very broadly purposable, but it doesn't mean it's suited for all threat environments. And that's kind of an important point. So, you know, again, probably obvious, economics drive businesses. Actually, it drives everybody. Economics rules the world. And particularly time, money, and skilled security people are limited resources. You think you can go find more. Well, you can't find more time. I guess we're getting an extra second next Tuesday, right? There's a leap second. But generally speaking, there are 24 hours in a day. And what that means to businesses is you want to do the things that are going to be the most valuable. And most valuable doesn't just mean getting more money. It may mean cost avoidance. I love the dialogue I have with people who say, well, evil slug vendors just want to build crap code over the wall and, you know, really bad security. I said, are you kidding me? Do you have any idea how much money it costs us if we mess it up? Millions. Millions and millions to put out patches. For those resources, I'd much rather take it and build something I can charge money for. And frankly, no customer ever calls me and says, you know, I am so bored this week, don't you have more security patches for me to apply? That never happens, right? And of course, we run on our own hardware and software, most of the big vendors do, and now cloud services. So you don't really want to be patching cloud services all the time, right? We have every possible incentive to try to make this better. So again, that's opportunity cost. What can I do with those resources that would lead more value? So economics really rules the world. Also, development is an industrial process. Oracle has, and again, this is not trying to be a sales pitch for Oracle. If you really want one, I'll stick a sales rep on you. But we have almost 5,000 products and cloud services. So, you know, billions of lines of code. So you have to be a very disciplined process about how do I put that together and how do I make sure it all works together. Which means that the life cycles may be years, and we may support these things for a long time. And why does this matter? Because if somebody tells me, and it's kind of like, you know, any large bureaucracy, you have to change this, it's got to be done in 2 weeks. Well, that's not always that possible, and I've had that happen. I need you to change the default configuration for X. That's great, but I can't do that in 2 weeks. Actually, I could, but I would probably break everything that depends on it. I need to make sure that if I change this, the things that run on it don't break. Customers hate it when you break something. So, just kind of the reality. The good news is, this is one of those be careful what you wish for. 10 years ago, I was saying, you know, you customers, you should be demanding better assurance. You should be out there really insist. Now, of course, everybody is. I'm like, uh-oh. So, which is good. This is good. This is not just intelligence entities and defense departments who are worried about the trustworthiness and the security worthiness of what they get from their IT providers. It's all customers, which is good. Because of this demand, there are a lot more, you know, more companies. Every big company you're going to talk to has a program like the ones that we have. And I like to say we compete on it. We don't. It's just good hygiene. It's good business. It's good hygiene. It's security enablement for everything else that we do. The problem is when everybody comes in and they want a different set of attestations. I want you to run your code through this. I want my sniffers to do this. No, 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 no. Because every time I have to do that, you know, doing a bunch of one-offs is not economic. It's not a good use of resource. And frankly, in some cases, it may threaten your intellectual property. So how does industry innovate? Well, frankly, for years, a lot of the input we had, when I first started working in security, I was a product manager for Oracle database security. And the only customers who really cared about what we did were the intelligence agencies. Bless your hearts, darling. They were the ones who'd come in and say, we got this problem, we're worried about this, and we want to know what you did. And they would, not just the bleeding edge, but the needing edge. They needed certain things, features, functions, certain things from us. And that's good, and I'm really appreciative of that, because that helped drive our product direction. And a lot of things that we built initially for that, that market sector are now standard commercial features. We have a lot of people using, probably more commercial customers, like granular, really granular access control. Be able to separate, what the DBA does. You could administer data, but you can't see it. Lots of other things that we built, which is great, because everybody gets the benefit of that need. And now we have more input from other sectors, because again, I like to say every customer has secrets. Some of them are national secrets, but all of them care very much about protecting that. So the other thing that is, there was discussions this week about innovative vendors, and there's plenty of room for innovation in terms of different things you can do to protect yourself. But the good thing is there's an awful lot that's built into the stack now, which is great, and people should be using it. Everything from, you can't do buffer overflow because the operating system prevents that, or the operating system has trusted realms. So if you want to do labeling, and you can protect that from everything else. This part's top secret. That isn't top secret. That's something else. But unfortunately, a lot of customers don't use it. You don't need to buy third-party encryption. Everybody encrypts stuff. Full encryption on disk, databases, all this stuff. And it almost hurts me when I know that somebody's paid for something and they're not using it. Oh, for Pete's sake, use this stuff, turn it on. And that's true from a lot of other suppliers. There's a lot of really good stuff you can use. Doesn't mean there aren't going to be other things that you're going to want, but hey, defense in depth. Everybody here is a warfighter knows that. It's not just one thing. And part of that starts with using what you already have and making sure it's enabled. Another thing that's a truism is that when you have a general flexible solution to a problem, it's actually probably better, and that is what also is going to drive industry. I can do one thing for one customer, or I can do one thing that's going to help 100 customers and 1,000 potential customers. Guess which one I'm going to do. So when I started working in security at Oracle, I was working on a product called Trusted Oracle. I love that product. It's a great product. But it enforced the old Orange Book, Bell LaPadula. Everybody remember that? Everything's labeled up the wazoo. And you enforce that kind of labeled access control everywhere. And we built it, a lot of other people did, and it turned out to be kind of security overkill for a lot of markets, right? I didn't want to label everything. That's a technical term, we patented it, security overkill. But what was true was a lot of commercial customers said, I'm not worried about top secret or unclassified. What I am worried about is I want sales reps to see orders for their customers, and the manager can see all the stuff for all the sales reps. So I'm already keeping information about those organizations. But why I want a more flexible access control that restricts it based on something I already have. And that's called row-level access control. And yeah, you can still label stuff if you want. But that other thing turned out to be far more marketable and far more useful, probably even in this community. So that's another truism. Innovation is great, but if you can solve a lot of problems instead of one problem, that's probably where people are going to put their industry's going to do it. So that's great. And I said, I've had a good run. When I started working in security, it was like being the Maytag repairman. Remember those ads? Loneliest guy in town. They never call. They never write. Now everybody wants to know about security. So it's fun. Job security. So what actually hurts innovation? One of them is compliance-driven security. When people, and I understand how we got here. Here are the 10 things you all should be doing. Check, 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 check. Then it became 100, then it became 1,000. Nobody can keep up with that, and they can't even do it. And what's worse is some of those boxes aren't meaningful to the same organizations. For example, God bless OWASP and SANS. They do a lot of good stuff. But when somebody asks me, do you comply with the top 10, good security or don't do these bad stuff OWASP lists, I said, that's not equally applicable to every product. If your product doesn't have SQL, you don't need to worry about SQL injection. Don't make me check that box. Yeah, database, but a lot of other products, no SQL. So when you get into this checkbox thing, then everybody checks the box because they have to, or their auditor's after them, but you may not be getting real security. But you have to do it to get the compliance guy or gal off your back. So that's a problem. And And a lot of times a bottom-up approach may be better because then you're sitting down and it's harder. What am I really worried about? Because some of those hygiene things are probably good, but maybe not equally applicable everywhere. And they tend to be, I won't say so last year, but sometimes things iterate. And what happens is you can build something new and innovative, and we do, and what happens is, well, I'm not using it as part of it, it's not part of a STIG. But it's going to solve your problem. It's not here, it's not on this checklist, I'm not doing it. So I understand why people do checkboxes, but sometimes you got to step back and say, why am I doing this? What am I really trying to worry about? That's more work, but if you don't do that, you're going to miss those innovations, that somebody might have a better mousetrap. The other thing that hurts, and again, this is not to be nasty to anybody. Not that I'm not capable of being nasty, but you're laughing, Kurt. I see that. It's a function of any large organization. And I work for a company that has about 130,000 employees. I'd love to tell you that Division A doesn't say something that's counter to Division B, but any organization has this problem. But when you have unclear or conflicting requirements, it really confuses your suppliers. You say potato and I say potato. Great George Gershwin song. Let's call the whole thing off. You got to use the same words, and sometimes both customers are confused. They don't know what the requirement is. It just says here, but wait a minute, it says over here something else. And your suppliers are. For example, FIPS 140 is it's actually not a product validation. So I'm sure this applies to people. It validates cryptographic implementations, which is important, right? Anybody thinks they can do crypto, most people mess it up. Very important. However, sometimes you have products that have multiple cryptographic libraries. Okay, so what does it mean? Okay, you FIPS 140 this, but not this one. Or do you need to do both of them, or all of them? What happens when you put out a patch? Sometimes we do patch, and you got to patch it because there's a security problem. Well, how does that affect the cryptographic validation? People are confused. Sometimes now we have two different groups issuing entropy requirements. Okay, so it's not, nobody's evil, nobody's malicious, but when you have those things, it tends to slow, it certainly slows down innovation, and it slows down uptake of innovation. So clarity is good. Uncertainty, businesses hate uncertainty. Part of it is because we like to plan. Actually, any organization likes to plan. So if you can't really know what the A is A, and A is going to be A for a while, or A changes to B really quickly, you need enough notice to be able to do that. I know very well from having been in the Navy that when they're always changing the uniforms. They're probably still doing that. Whatever the thing was last week, they're coming out with a new uniform. But they can't say in 2 weeks you all have to be in this new uniform, because they got to gear things up and they got to phase it in, and maybe it's not the right season of the year, and they got to get the right shoulder boards. So businesses is like that. We need notice, and a lot of times you need a grandfathering, because if you miss a major release for one of our products, it's going to be 3 years, because you can't make big changes in a little point release. Customers hate that. Wait a minute, I just thought I was applying a patch and you threw a whole bunch of functionality on me. Can't do that. So when somebody says change X, it may take 5 years. That sounds really strange, because we are very nimble. But the example I could come up with was, anybody remember, was it FDCC? It's probably got a different acronym, Federal Desktop Configuration. Good idea, right? Lock stuff down, make sure it runs on a lockdown version of originally it was just Windows. Except that, again, if I change this, I got to make sure all of my things that run on Windows have that change. And maybe that ripples through another product, and then what runs on that product has to change. So you got to do the sequencing, and it may be 5 years before it goes through the entire dependent product stack. Again, not because we're lazy, but you have to make sure it works and doesn't break stuff. So that's not bad. Locking operating systems down, locking the stack down, that's all good. It's not something that could automatically, magically happen. So what other things sort of hurt innovation? Again, I'm very mindful that the intentions here are very good, and I truly appreciate that IAD has a dialogue with industry, and as does NIAP. So the intent is, we don't want, we want shorter, more meaningful, cheaper, faster rev common criteria evaluations, all of which is a really good idea. The difficulty is that in the uncertainty over this directional change, everybody, including a lot of third parties, are sticking their hands up and going, I have a new assurance mechanism. It's called, Frabistat, or it's this, or I'm going to scan your code. And that all, because nature abhors a vacuum instead of marketplaces, all this stuff's getting traction. So now I'm getting asked to do the same thing 12 times. And it's not a standard, and common criteria is a standard. So I'd rather do one thing that's really good and matters, that counts in a bunch of different countries. And then I can take my resources and security resources and, okay, did that, now I'm going to go off and do other things, instead of And unfortunately, again, not ill-intentioned, because of the intention to do lightweight, repeatable, everybody does the vanilla version. If we build new feature, we can't evaluate it anymore, at least not in the US. And the problem is, integrators want to use it, and they want to know that we did some security work. So they're going to come back and ask me for a one-off. Every time there's a bid out, every time there's a project, I got to do a whole different thing for them for this cool new feature that only we have, or maybe only one of my competitors has. So that hurts. It's not intentional, but it's something I hope we can find a way to resolve, because we like to innovate. We like to innovate in security. So are all competitors. This is good. But we need to be able to prove our security claims about that. So we've got to find a way to do that. Sometimes the lack of scoping. There's a new protection profile out, relatively new, about software applications. And unfortunately, it doesn't say what the scope is. I got to tell you, there's a big difference between a mobile app, I got an iPhone, and an ERP applications, enterprise resource applications, where you've got to pull in the database and the operating system and directories and identity management and the whole, billions and billions of lines of code. Those are very different. It's like the difference between, again, my sport gun, how does it perform on a battlefield versus an M4? That's a whole different, very different threat, very different everything. So, and unfortunately, because of this uncertainty, what I feared would happen has happened, that now this has become balkanized. So that means a lot of countries are not accepting the US's directions. Again, they're very well intended. So a bunch of us vendors are going to have to do at least 2 of these things. So I'm going to have to take resources and do 2 things at least, if not 3. So nobody's evil intended. I hope that this will resolve itself over time. But it does, in a way, hurt innovation. So what helps innovation? Well, dialogue does. So again, thank you IAD for being a group that talks to industry. And there is a dialogue. And we may not agree on everything, but having that dialogue helps us understand, oh, I understand now what your point is. I didn't think about that. Oh, I didn't think about your problem either. And that's good, because we get to a better place. And we're not talking past one another. Another thing that helps is a clear problem statement. I spend a lot of my time now reading, maybe it's a proposed NIST standard or it's a procurement requirement, and I got to tell you, I almost never see a problem statement. And I know that when people draft these, they know what they're worried about. But if you don't tell industry, well, what's going to happen is the procurement officer is going to take this and they'll say, do you comply with this? Whether or not it's applicable. So, and saying, I'm worried about X because of Y. I realize I may not know all the whys because I'm not clear to know, and I understand that. But without that, and without a use case, it's very difficult to know what are you really worried about. And that way, that helps us say, oh great, I got a solution for that, or maybe I could tweak this way. And to give you one example, there was a cryptographic standard that came out. Sorry, I don't remember the particular. And I couldn't tell from reading it whether they meant this to apply to, super special secret sauce things that go on in certain intelligence agencies, or they meant this to apply to everything. And it said, if you mean this to apply to everything, it's going to break all the standards that we use. Things like key storage. Most keys are session keys are ephemeral. You don't want me storing them. You sure don't want them reused. But it was never clear. What are you worried about? What is your use case? Who is this supposed to apply to? And then, of course, what's going to happen is it's going to get thrown out and said, do you comply with this, whether or not it's applicable. Terminology. You would be amazed that even in the same company, I found this out when we acquired Sun. If you say module to a hardware person, it's a lot different than you say module to a software person. Very different, totally different planet. So having very precise terminology in a document or requirement or incorporated by reference is really important, because some people say, oh, what's a vulnerability? Is it a misconfiguration? I don't think so. I mean, it could lead to one. But there's a big difference between any defect, security defect, exploitable security defect. Those are all really different. And when somebody just throws vulnerability out there, it turns out they mean you didn't configure it properly. Boy. Backdoor. Boy, I get this one a lot. I have a standard cut and paste. What do you mean by that? Because products sometimes have undocumented functionality. And what that means is we put something in there, not evil, malicious takeover. It's there for other purposes, but not intended to be used by customers. Right? It's fair to ask us, do we have stuff like that? For example, things that we use for diagnostic purposes. But it's not an evil backdoor that takes over and hoovers out your data. And it's not, by the way, some defect we didn't know about. That's not a backdoor. It's an exploitable security defect. So again, you have to be very precise in language, because otherwise you're talking past one another, and we can never really get to matching the innovation with the expectations. Supply chain. Oh boy, this is one. Supply chain, I actually thought of this. I said, you know what, if you believe the account in Genesis, only God created something from nothing. Everybody else has a supply chain. So when somebody says supply chain risk, I say, are you worried that I'm going to run out of paper clips? Or what are you worried about? What does that mean? Because buying a crappy product is not a supply chain risk. It's a business risk. I bought a lemon. Should have done my homework better. That's not a supply chain risk. There are other types of supply chain risk. I only have one supplier. What if he goes out of business? Well, that's not really a cyber risk, is it? Again, it's a business risk. It's something a lot of businesses are concerned about, or they're hosed. And probably people who buy things. I want to know you didn't get a sole source, because if they go out of business, then I'm stuck. But again, these are all very different things. And frankly, in cyber, there are only really two things. One of them is counterfeiting, which is a solvable problem. The other one is the evil malware and code that nobody knows is there. That's not a solvable problem. I wish it were. I'm not saying I don't care, by the way. I care very much. The things that any supplier should do, that's reasonable restrictions. Who's accessing that? Do I have restrictions on access? Do I do testing? But you cannot find something that somebody deliberately put in there. No one likes that, but I was on the Defense Science Board with a gentleman from Sandia, and he did that. He challenged, put something in there, challenged expert code reviewers, told them where to look, and they couldn't find it. So again, asking your supplier, do you have reasonable restrictions, good practices, all those things, that's fine. But that problem is not solvable. And we're better off kind of acknowledging that. Again, I'm not saying I don't care. Reasonable efforts are absolutely important. Oracle does not let me touch code. Not because I'm an evil person, at least as far as that's concerned. I'm a really rotten programmer. I have no business touching source code. I guess I can say that I'm a rotten programmer. Not my best skill set. So what helps innovation? There are a lot of things that people can do that will really be helpful, particularly if we're having this dialogue between suppliers and those who depend on the systems that we build. Well, one of them is to have prescriptive minimalization. So it turns out, our lawyers hate best practice, not because they don't want us to do good practice, but there actually is no best practice. If you say best practice, it becomes a legal issue. There are a range of good practices, but there isn't one size fits all. Even with what we do at Oracle in the assurance program that we impose not only on all development, on-premises, cloud, and our consulting organization. We all have to kind of build, there's assurance in. But we don't have a single development methodology. We have Agile, we have Waterfall. Sometimes you can't do things exactly the same way for every single programming language and every single development organization. That doesn't mean that we don't have consistent practices, it means that we are adaptive. And so when somebody says, I need you to do it X way, well, it may not work for all your suppliers, and there may be good reasons for that. It may be anti-competitive, because unfortunately, if somebody would ask me to say, what's the best way to build a database, or what are the best features? Even if I'm not evil-minded and trying to dominate the whole world, I'm probably going to come up with things that look like Oracle, because that's what I know. That's my limitation. Somebody from IBM would probably come up with something like IBM. We're not intentionally being evil. It's just that everybody has their own myopia. So if you tell me to do it a particular way, you may be overly prescriptive, and it may be anti-competitive and run into somebody's patents. Also, government needs to be mindful that when you tell people to do something a certain way, again, it's not because it's the government, because any large bureaucracy is sometimes slow to change. Buggy whip effect. We're still specifying how to build buggy whips. Well, we're not doing buggy whips anymore. We're well into, electric cars. And the other one I'm really concerned about, industry makes a lot of mistakes. I have worked on dog products, not many, but I've worked on at least one that failed in the marketplace. We made a mistake, and we paid for that. We just said, okay, we learned from that, we're not going to do that, and we're going to go off. We're going to do something else. But when government tells industry, here's what we need you to build, then you're making everybody do something, and the failure is on a bigger scale. And again, I love that trust Oracle, B1 system, but they failed in the marketplace. We learned from that, and we adapted that. We took that knowledge and did something interesting with it. But there were a lot of companies who signed up, operating systems and databases, and you know what? When prescribing a certain way, it turned out that there was a lot of resources used, not just one company making a business decision and having to eat it. So that's the concern, not that expressing your needs isn't good, but if somebody prescribes something, you have to do it this way, and it does fail or it's not adopted in the marketplace, that's a lot of resource that goes down the tubes. It could have been used for something else. Industry is really good at making their own mistakes, so let us do that more often, be successful, and capitalize on that. But if we're going to make a mistake, it should be our mistake. Being pragmatic. I really wish that before anybody told me you have to do X, that they would at least think about doing an economic analysis, because again, resources are limited. What matters the most would be implementable across a lot of suppliers and cost the least. Because a lot of your innovators are smaller companies. We can do, we're a big company, we could probably do some of these things, but a smaller innovative company that might have that solution you want may not be able to do that, or not do it economically, which may lead to fewer suppliers. So a couple of things I know we want to stay on schedule. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. And again, some of these have gone by the wayside, but it's an example of what I'm talking about. So at one point, there was something, I think it was from Homeland Security, where they wanted to be notified about all personnel changes involving maintenance. Okay, I don't know what they mean by that. So we have, again, thousands of products, thousands of developers. Every day they check out code and make a change and check it in. We have processes around that. Probably every day we've got multiple hundreds, if not thousands of people checking in code where they didn't write it. Is that a personnel change involving maintenance? Am I going to report that to you? What are you going to do with that? Am I going to tweet you 10,000 days? Jürgen checked out Jose's code and made a change. What is that going to do for you? I'm sure what they meant was, if you take this system that you've outsourced and you move it over to potentially hostile foreign nation state as an outsource, I want to know about that. But that's not what it said. Root cause analysis. Somebody, it was a NIST publication. If you have a security defect, first thing you should do is root cause analysis. Okay, we've got a very high severity security vulnerability being exploited in the wild, and customers are calling up support. What do you think the first thing I'm going to do is? Root cause analysis or get a patch out? Let me think. I'm going to get a patch out. And if I'm going to do root cause analysis, I'm not going to do it on a really low-level security vulnerability. CVSS 0, who cares? 9, I care about those. And we do deep dives on those. What caused it? Did you look for it everywhere else? Have we put a test case in? Have we added it to our scanning tools? We debrief all the developers on it. If you have a really bad one, we want to learn from that one. That's the one to do. That's a better use of a scarce resource than doing a deep dive on every single one. Again, well-intended. We got scarce resources. Let's put them where they matter. And third-party code analysis, I don't even want to tell you how bad this is, except when somebody says we want a third party to look at your code, aside from the fact that we already run those tools, their false positives are horrible. Really awful. Really, really bad. One of them is supposedly a market leader. Somebody inappropriately gave our code to them, which they weren't allowed to do. What do you think their accuracy rate was? 0. 100% false positives. They wasted the time of one of our senior people for hours making sure there was no there. Don't make me do that. Ask your supplier, what do? Do you look for exploitable defects? Talk to me. Talk to me about that. That's reasonable. Don't make me give it to a third party. They don't know what they're doing. Running a tool is nothing. The ability to analyze the code is everything. We have that. They don't. Don't make me do that. Not to mention it's our IP. So last thing I'm going to talk about really quickly is to think differently about this problem. And one of them is, I know that we are moving toward more IT enablement, but honestly, I feel like the discussions we're having have to do with putting baby-safe pins on hand grenades. Please, don't put the hand grenade in the kid's crib. That's the answer to this problem. Launch nuclear weapons, there's an app for that. Do you really want an iPhone app that's going to launch weapons? So we can create systemic risk if we are not careful with this. And the metric to think is not about cost benefit, because it's always cheaper to stick a sensor out there. It's what is the risk equivalence? In the old world, 5 people could walk in a nuclear power plant, get past gates, guns, and guards, turn the knob to move the reactor rods in. That was a manageable risk. If you do this remotely and you get it wrong, anybody with one of these who knows how, and you can find instructions, could potentially access that power plant from the internet. And I have a white hat friend who did that. That's the discussion to have. What do you think the odds are that you will ever have risk equivalence between those two scenarios? 0. So be thoughtful. But be thoughtful before we go there. And last topic, and I think we're out of time. there really is nothing new under the sun. And one of the things I like to do, because I have a magpie's interest, is to think about other realms and how they would apply to cybersecurity. One of which is biological systems. There's a point to this, I promise. Do you know that pine trees, when under attack by pine beetles, they send out signals to trees near them to say, raise your defenses, the bugs are after me. Now, if a tree can do that, which has no measurable intelligence, why can't network elements do that? Why don't we have network elements that are smart enough to say, I'm under attack, raise your defenses? Animals do that. We have that with honeypots. There are spiders who create fake legs to look like bigger-ass spiders. That's a technical term. And if we had network elements that did that, if we could camouflage our networks in some way, then the attackers wouldn't know what to go after. If they were evolving, why do we have camouflage on the battlefield? Why are there ghillie suits? So that somebody can't spot you and take you out. Marines, I love the Marines. I'm sure there's some here in the audience. I do know the difference between oorah and hoo-yah, very important distinction. And one of the things I truly respect about the Marines is the ethos, every Marine a rifleman. Because you will never hear a Marine say, excuse me, Mr. Bad Guy, I'm not the person you're supposed to be attacking. See the one with the M4? That's the one you're supposed to be going after. I'm just the admin clerk. That is not the Marines. Every Marine is a rifleman, first and foremost. Why don't network elements self-defend? Why don't every single one of them? You cannot defend yourselves with some little perimeter thingy out there. Marines do not assume their perimeter won't be breached. They're badasses. They know they are. They're lethal. They're trained to be lethal. And last, what if we had networks that could dynamically reconfigure themselves, a la OODA loops? I'm sure a lot of you know who Major John Boyd was. If our networks were more maneuverable and more adaptive, we would put our adversaries off balance, that they were able to do that. That is a strong defensive measure, and that, as he said, was what prevailed in air warfare, was maneuverability. And our networks are not very maneuverable, they're very static. So this is all really in the out there lane, but we have really good minds in this audience, and I trust that a lot of people will go off and noodle on these, and we will find a way to take these lessons from other realms, military history, and biological systems, Marine ethos, and we will adapt them to what is, alas, the new battlefield. And that's all I had. I want to thank you, and again, thank our gracious host for a really lovely event. I'm very honored to be able to speak to you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. That concludes our general session for day 3. Our track sessions will begin at 10 o'clock, and I hope that you'll take advantage of as many of them as you can manage. Thank you very much.